when we were scripting it, they teach you the basics of writing in school about this arc and like the beginning, the climax, the whatever. Our very starting point was, how do I break the arc? That's kind of the opening scene of the film, right? It starts with this election commissioner who asks about the dead grandmother, and you expect the film to unravel about the dead grandmother, but it just goes somewhere else, because again, that's how life happened. And also, we were trying to play with the audience's expectation there, right? Like, you've seen the lead character go in and out of the frame consistently. You've seen her, she's present, but you will not follow her, because our tendency is to follow either the most spectacular event or to follow the most powerful in terms of societal structure and hierarchy. That strategy was also used to do that, to like have us question, oh, how did I not even realize that she might be the lead of the film?
So there are two questions I have essentially. So did the real life Lata see this film, and what was her reaction? And the second one was, pardon my dry sense of humor, but one of the things which I found funny in the film was the placement of the paintings at various places, in the kitchen and in the top of the bathroom. And since you have been talking about your association with painting, I wanted to understand, what those paintings were, and like, what was the design behind it?
Oh my God, thank you that somebody noticed the paintings. I mean, a lot of actually this film's, image, like visual references were Vermeer paintings in terms of light and all of that. And in terms of the design of the paintings, again, there was like this, I don't know if you guys noticed, but the living room specifically has Hussein's, and I don't know what legal rights I needed to put that there, but a lot of it was this, like, again, a commentary or like an attempt at making very clear the space that she's occupying, this canon of history and art and all of the art around it, but who gets to even understand it, who gets to even look at it, who gets to put it on their walls? What does it mean sitting on a wall of a house like this? The fact that you can put art in a bathroom. That was basically just, I wanted the frames to be infused with art, but also I grew up in a house that was infused with a lot of art on all the walls, but I don't think anyone knew what was on the walls. Like, a big thing was this relationship to collection. Like, an uncle of mine is an art collector, and of course I love him to pieces, and he very generously let us borrow his paintings for a film. Yeah. But when you have a conversation around why are you collecting this piece of art, it's economical value. Like, this is the value of a Hussein, and this is the value of a Raza, and this is this, and like, this is the history of how he became a painter. But is that piece of art speaking to you? Like, are you actually connecting to what's on your walls? So sort of, and it's a particular kind of, even in the upper class space, there are many divisions in ways of living. We kind of touch on it a little bit in the scene where she goes to the neighbor's house, and it's that big silver door that opens, and you see how that space is infused with a very different kind of living. I mean, the help in that house is in uniform, a very particular kind of colonial relationship to labor. So that's also a whole other section of, I haven't even gotten to exploring any of that yet. But so part of it was creating the kind of family that this is, right? It's supposedly a sensitive family that has a relationship to art, is quite modern in a certain way, and all of those things. So that's where the paintings came into play. Has the real life Lata. So Lata, the character, is not based on one person's life or like a real person. It's, yes, there was Lata. There was a person named Lata that worked in my house.
That's like the actor who played it. The actor who played
Shobha.
it.
Shobha, yeah, Shobha. So Shobha, of course, Shobha has seen the film. Whenever it won awards, we always brought Shobha to, as much as we could, to the Zoom sessions of it. In terms of the script itself, at the time that I was making this script, two girls were working in my house. One is Deepa, who now doesn't work at my house, but I see her, I'm in touch with her, and she has a baby now. And Deepa was also around 22, 23. And there was Manisha, who, it's a beautiful and funny story, but she wanted to audition to play the role of Lata. And I had a big discussion discussion with her on how it was. Both me and Mireya, who is the co-writer and producer of the film, were very like unsure about Manisha auditioning, because we were like, wait, she works in your house. This is a really messed up power dynamic. But she was so excited with the potential possibility of acting, and we were this close. Like basically she was cast.
Yeah.
And then the most beautiful, funny, amazing thing happened, which is that she eloped with her boyfriend and disappeared and ghosted us completely. And it was both like, oh my God, what do we do? But also like, wow, like, I guess love intervened. I don't know what to say. And she like literally, but she also left the job. So not left, but like didn't show up to work. So my mom was flipping out, and me and Deepa and Mireya were just laughing and looking at my mom. We're like, but she ran for love. Like, why are you angry? Like, even if it's the worst relationship of her life, she like, this is beautiful. That is how we landed on Shobha eventually. And I think it was the best thing that could have happened to the film. I think Shobha, I mean, when I met her, it was obvious that she is an incredible person and an incredible human. Like, her capacity to stay present in front of the camera is so large, and we knew we needed the kind of actor that could hold a frame, because there's nothing else happening. It's just her. Like, and we needed someone that could hold that space and was very watchable and very like present in front of the camera. And she was amazing. And yeah, of course, she's seen it. I think at this point she's probably sick of it. But the reason I mentioned Deepa and Manisha, sorry, I forgot, is because they were our script consultants. So while Deepa ended up being my costume designer, because she wanted to be involved as well, and we talked about it, and we first thought she'd be a costume assistant, and then Mireya was like, Alisha, just give her the job, like let her do it. No one knows this space better than Deepa. And so she managed all the costumes and was amazing. My hope is that when we make a feature, I bring her on as costume designer. Like she understood continuity. She has stopped a shot and been like, she's come to me and been like, Alisha, wahan pe pani nahi tha pehle shot pe. Wo garmi tha, so she's sweating, we need to dry it. And I was like, you have never done this before. How do you know this? Because again, we presume what is dumb and what is smart, right? So she did costumes, and Manisha and her were script consultants in that through various drafts of writing, we would read it to them. And obviously the dialogue was all written in Hindi and sometimes Marathi. And it was amazing to have their feedback, because Manisha is an extremely blunt person. And there were moments during the feedback process where she looked at me saying, "Ha, likha to bahut acha hai." She'd say, "Livle, changle livle, par asa kai hote nahi." And I was like, I'd look, and she was like, yeah, this is nice. It's your fantasy and all very sweet, but this is not my life. She was very blunt and very direct. And there were moments where she was like, I remember there was a scene, an old scene in the film, that she was laughing and all. And at the end, I was like, okay, so you liked it? She was like, yeah, if it's a comedy. and so she was very direct, and we got it. Just was an amazing experience. It just kept making us question how we are writing it and how it is being experienced. And I think by the final draft of the script, I remember Manisha reading it and saying, I have never seen a character like me on screen where all you're watching is me. Why are you watching it? And that was the first time we were like, oh, we're getting close. Something is working.
And the way you used Alia Bhatt in that particular one moment, which is such a strong political statement, like it jumped, like it's for 10 seconds, I think, or what she's saying, and the way you use that clip, I was just like, what is the process that would have gone, like, I don't want you to answer that, but the process that would have gone to arrive at that clip was such beautiful, and the way it came across in the film.
And also, just to clarify, because I do think a lot of places didn't want to screen the film because of that clip choice. I didn't realize people would take it so personally. It is not attacking Alia Bhatt. Exactly. I have no qualms against, I mean, my film is not about Alia Bhatt. So every time I did interviews after Lata and was asked why I chose that clip as though I chose it to make a statement of Alia Bhatt, my only response is, if that's your question after the film, you haven't watched the film. Because it's not about her. It's about a particular milieu and a particular, how even what we watch on TV is a choice. And we're making those choices all the time, and the same family that is attuned to art and that like seems so liberal and open, and like the girl is wearing tiny shorts, and like that same supposedly open family is still extremely tunnel visioned in what they choose to watch and what is considered news, and why all of a sudden this conversation around depression becomes such a big deal. Like it's more looking at a system and looking at what we choose to watch, not Alia Bhatt in any way or form.
I think when we think of art or film, we know that it's most of the time about the film and what the film is about, what the filmmaker thinks about it, but it's also about the audience, where the audience comes from, and like what you were talking about, like for me to experience the kind of emotions that the character is going through, we are not on the same levels, and so we can't understand those same emotions. And speaking about myself, I've just recently graduated. I'm looking for a master's course in filmmaking, and for the last 3-4 months, I'm just going with the dilemma of whether I should continue filmmaking, whether I should start making a film or not. And I've been practicing theater of the oppressed for the last 6-7 months, and
Oh, wow.
we have got the
That's Augusto
time.
Boal, no?
Yeah, August
Yeah,
we
amazing.
practice.
I read that book for this film.
And
Huh.
yeah, also when you are talking about, most of the things that you are talking about is already in the book that we are reading right now, Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And
Yeah.
it's so much, it's basically the same conversation. And I was just going through, like Alisa is just reaffirming those same thoughts that we have been going through. Recently we got a workshop with a group of kids, like 10-15 साल के बच्चे from this Kutum Foundation, and this is an NGO who have been doing theater workshop with this children. So like we are just the members from student community. We have been practicing theater of the oppressed. We don't have the knowledge or skills, or at least I don't think we can impart that kind of workshop, and we can take this workshop. But I was just struggling with this thought, like today we have to prepare them for a play, and they have to make this play. And while we were making this play, they were asking these thoughts like, what is caste, like we don't know about caste. And they were like they were confusions about caste ke upar when we were making a play. And it was just leading to the thoughts like uh, how much we think that we have this power and we have this knowledge, and that can contribute, and that can go with the flow, and that it will go well. But yeah, so I'm not able to articulate my point, but basically, like when we were doing that work, so we were just understanding how the practicality of art does not come into play when you actually practice it. And it's a further long by the same thing about questions, and it just ends up with questions, and
Questions,
it
yeah.
just leads up to a कहते हैं, wall that you can't break after a point of time. And yeah, that's tough things that were going into my mind. My question is basically that like
More question.
yeah, just a question, like it's not even a question, but I just thought like I specifically remember at one point you said in this conversation that you were thinking about whether I should make this film or not. And then you said that I have to make this film, and you have been talking about that why do you want to make the film, but I again just want to know, like, why did you make this film? And like yeah, I'm pretty sure with my 21 years of existence in this planet, I think at the end of the day we all just have choices, and we have to live with those choices, and what we choose is what define our lives.
Oof, very big question. It's still a question I'm answering. And then I realized I don't need an answer. I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't have an answer. I don't know. The like very smart, topical, sort of conscious, intellectual answer could be like, oh, it's a system that I've lived with and it really disturbs me deeply. All of that is true, but and it's true, it's a problematic system, and but it was for me, honestly, just my relationship to it was much deeper. it was for me, a very big experience. It was really asking questions. It was questions around why we live like this, why I live like this. Yeah, I think it's just something somebody, actually, Mireya mentioned to me once that she noticed that my filmmaking practice is based deeply in just observation and observation of spaces. And so she said, I think to me, it makes absolute sense that this is the film you're making, because you know this house, you know all the people in it, and you have observed the entry and exit in all of the doors of this house for 28 years. So it makes absolute logical sense that you make your first film about this house. And that made sense.
Yeah,
Like,
completely.
that made more honest sense to me than like, yeah, of course, making work about class and caste politics is necessary and important, and those are all valid answers. And I have a background in human rights and like all of these things. But I think most deeply, if I'm being fully honest, I made a space film about something that I know. And the thing I know most intimately is this space. And in this space, I know how this relationship has always been tough. And to better understand it, you know that saying के कहते हैं कि अगर कुछ समझना हो तो सबसे पहले घर में समझो, फिर बात like your biggest experience is your backyard in your house. Then like you can travel the whole world, but you'll come back to find all the jewels in your backyard. I think in some ways, for me, coming back to making this film in my own house in a city like Bombay that I had left very consciously because I didn't feel like I liked the city or belonged to the city, it was a return to all of these things, to understanding my life, to understanding me, to understanding my family, to understanding the city of Bombay, and discovering a very new side of the city of Bombay. Growing up in South Bombay can also be a very tight bubble. Breaking that bubble is also extremely hard, again, because of class and caste politics. And this was an attempt to break all of it, I think, and to see how if I could break it in some small way, and if I could, how would I do it? I don't think these were conscious choices. I think I'm saying it all in retrospect. Yeah. Which is another thing that I think often filmmakers will say things and not clarify that this is a thought that happened baad mein. Because in the moment you're making, and it's not all as intellectual as it seems, and anything and everything can be intellectualized. So a lot of things happen in retrospect, and even I've noticed as I keep doing talks about the film, things keep changing. Yeah. And they actually get more refined and better and sound more astute. But the seed thought was not ever linguistic. The seed thought is emotional always.
Yeah. I think a person once said to me that we often live our lives in retrospect only, and we think that we are living in the moment, but it never happens.
My question was essentially, so when I watched Rohana Guerra's Sir, where Tilotama Shom essentially plays the maid who sort of crosses those invisible class and maybe caste lines to have that attraction towards her employer. And but for that, the employer is shown to be this lonely, lonesome man who's existential and sort of still coming to terms with what his purpose and his identity is in life. So I found that film problematic. I wanted to know your earnest, unfiltered thoughts on Sir as a film. You might like it, not like it. You might not have even watched it, but from whatever you've heard, I would want to know your thoughts on that film. And secondly, I would want to know what is your most favorite piece of art. It can be a film, a painting.
Oh God.
It can be a book, anything.
Favorite piece of art is very hard. I think maybe it's too hard, and I'm sure you'll ask me in one day and it'll be a different answer. But
Today.
I think right now there is a there's a filmmaker that I turn to repeatedly that has deeply influenced my work, and that's Lucrecia Martel. Her work, and also I had the privilege and joy of being able to meet her when she was in Bombay, and I think just the respect with which she treats artists, irrespective of whether you are emerging, famous, not famous, like the amount of respect with which she treats the cinematic medium, and therefore her interest in talking to younger filmmakers, just all of that to me was very powerful. Her work, but also just her being in the world. I do think that it's not very often to find an artist that walks the talk in some ways. Again, other people may have had different experiences with her. I had a very beautiful experience. Humans are complicated and complex, and to expect a filmmaker or any kind of artist to be an exemplary human being is also some fantasy, but there was just a lot to learn from her. So I do turn to that really often. And there is a book that actually I don't turn to. It's very weird. I've only read the book once, but I carry it with me everywhere. And every time I fly back to India, that book follows, Devotional Cinema. And it is by Nathaniel Dorsky. It's not that I've watched a ton of his work or anything. I was introduced to the book at CalArts, and it's a tiny little book. And just the title alone left a very large impression on me, but the book itself left a large impression in how it talks about the cinematic experience. So it's a book I carry. I honestly have not read it more than once. So it's not even like I can say, oh, I read it 15 times, or it's just a book that has left a mark. Answers will change tomorrow. I don't know. And about Sir, I think something that and this is not an attempt to be diplomatic, something that I learned at school and at CalArts, we used to have these critique sessions, right? Like anyone who's gone to art school has a critique session. And something that they did was we kept experimenting with the type of critique, like how the critique was set up. Would you first question the filmmaker? Do you first do this? Do you first do that? And in that, one rule that was made was that we never use the word like or dislike, because what you like or dislike is irrelevant, right? Because that becomes personal choice. That's like, I like sugar, I don't like sugar type. But so it's not an effective critique to anybody, not to yourself as a filmmaker who's trying to learn or grow from something or make something different, but it's also not effective to the filmmaker itself. So I think it's irrelevant whether I liked or disliked. So I think for me, what was most relevant was that it was interesting that people compared the two films a lot. In some write-ups, they were compared, most often compared in using negative or positive terms. And nobody did a interesting critique enough to compare the modes used or the conversation being brought up. It was always a like or dislike, which to me was pointless. But what I found so interesting in that comparison was that in the very comparison, to me, was base of, or the heart of what I was trying to make with my film, right? Which is that you were comparing the two based on story. And I'm telling you, I'm not interested in the story. Yes, I'm interested in stories, but in each frame, there's multiple stories. And this, like when we were scripting it, they teach you the basics of writing in school about this arc and like the beginning, the climax, the whatever. Our very starting point was, how do I break the arc? That's kind of the opening scene of the film, right? It starts with this election commissioner who asks about the dead grandmother, and you expect the film to unravel about the dead grandmother, but it just goes somewhere else. Because again, that's how life happens. And also, we were trying to play with the audience's expectation there, right? Like you've seen the lead character go in and out of the frame consistently. You've seen her, she's present, but you will not follow her, because our tendency is to follow either the most spectacular event or to follow the most powerful in terms of societal structure and hierarchy. So we will follow the upper class by conditioning, or we will follow the most tantalizing piece of information. So that strategy was also used to do that, to like have us question, oh, how did I not even realize that she might be the lead of the film, right? And in that sense, the very fact that they tried to compare these two films was already, to me, questioning the fact that was already posing the question I'm posing. Like, what are we looking at and how are we trained to look? No disrespect to the filmmaker of Sir. To me, I am not interested in a story about the working class's obsession with the upper class. Because again, I'm not saying that love stories don't happen between classes. But in a world that is saturated with characters and stories where the relationship between the upper class and the lower class travels in one direction, right? And the only reason that relationship exists is because either one is fascinated with the other, or something spectacular has to happen. A murder, a love story. I can't even think of anything else. Somebody borrowed money, somebody stole money. These are like the basic, you need that plot point. Otherwise, there is no reason for the character to exist. But when I think of other films, there are films with extremely rich people going on vacation for 3 hours of the movie, and we watch nothing but their vacation trips in fancy cars, and for us, that's a story. Or you watch Friends, and Friends is just 5 very rich people living in apartments that nobody can afford in New York. I don't know where that bloody apartment came from. And we're just watching them do nothing. And nobody questions that. But when a character of an oppressed class has to be introduced into a story, something has to happen. And this I don't understand. So in its very essence, the films are doing different things. So to me, comparing them has never made sense. And I think Sir is doing a very different thing. And therefore, the requirement for its performance is different. And Lata is doing a very different thing. So to me, comparing them has not made sense, other than the fact that the character is a maid. But there are maids in many films. So I guess that's my response to Sir. And many people have asked me this question.
So yeah, just the last bit which you said kind of, was on the lines of my question. One of the things which has been ingrained in me is key storytelling is conflict resolution. When you start like trying to understand, okay, well, how do you find resonance with the audiences? You give up the conflict, you set it up, and you help them find the resolution for it. That is from where the narrative structures are coming into play. But of late, I have been myself been questioning this thing. What are the other possible narrative structures which are not essentially conflict resolution? Because maybe conflict resolution stems a lot from the patriarchal or like the capitalistic systems that we are a part of. So I just wanted to understand that you actually answered in the last bit, which you said in the way, your film still has a certain structure to it. Like, it might not have the protagonist structure, but the space becomes the, sort of protagonist in that sense, and all of that. So I just wanted to understand, how have you been, sort of been arriving at the narrative structure of which is without a conflict resolution. And like the key factor for me is there is resonance with the audience. Like this film still resonates with so many of us. Like we have seen these characters in and around us, but essentially the conflict is not resolved and the questions are left. So how have you been like kind of, sort of dealing with those questions or like those ideas?
I think for some reason, and maybe it was my arrogance as a art student, possible. And sometimes I'm grateful for that arrogance because it made me very stubborn in finding my own answer. But I never took any of the screenwriting classes at Calvans. I took classes on narrative structure and form that were taught by Leanne. And that class was specifically focused on this. What is the traditional narrative structure and form that comes from this Aristotelian historical setting and its relationship to the current world we live in, its relationship to politics, aesthetics, oppression, all of these things. Those classes to me were very interesting. But I never took the traditional, this is how you write a film. So actually, if you ask me to draw the arc for you, I don't know it. I never took it by choice. I didn't want to learn it. Which in some ways might be in opposition to Jane, who always said, learn the masters and then break it. But as I grew as a filmmaker, I realized all the masters were men, and I didn't really need to learn all of them. And that I didn't want to learn that system because I've already sort of learned it through conditioning, right? All we have watched is that form of storytelling. So to then sit in a class and be told how to write it, for me felt like a block. Like it was giving me a structure that I had to follow, and it was blocking my own process. So, and now in retrospect, I'm grateful that I never ever did it. It's very funny that you asked me this question, because just yesterday we were joking. A friend had come over, and there is someone, it's, I don't know how it came up, but a quote by Satyajit Ray came up in that conversation. And in the quote, he writes, I'm a filmmaker that it's not, don't quote him directly because I don't remember the words, but something on the lines of, I don't understand why I need to write a script because I work in a visual medium. So this idea of putting, the only purpose of that script in the written word is technically a document to communicate with your crew, because they don't live in your head. So they need to understand what you want them to do. So you're trying to make it a very clear document of instructions, essentially. And those instructions include, there is 3 paintings on the wall and the room is gloomy and the sun is setting, because that is giving me time, place, lighting, all of these things to communicate with the crew. The rest of the script for me is not about the word. I can't answer what a dialogue heavy script would feel like. I've never written one yet. I'm terrified of writing one. I will try to write one at some point. But I do think that in that sense, the structure and form for me is not based in conflict and resolution, because like I said, I am more interested in the films that complicate the conflict, because it's in the complication of the conflict that the true nuances of life exist. Because if everything was conflict resolution, we wouldn't live in the world we live in now. We have all these extremely intelligent white men telling the world what to do, and we still don't have a resolution. So the problem, I don't think the answers are in finding a resolution. The answers are in dissecting the conflict and looking at the minuscule, minute elements of the conflict and learning to either live with it. And only once you learn to live with it can you change it, or accepting it, or embracing it, or acknowledging what you didn't see. There's all these ways to engage with that conflict. But starting with, this is the conflict and this is the resolution, is not to, science has its place in life. I do not believe in science, but is to approach everything in a scientific manner, that this is the hypothesis and therefore this is the end. But all aspects of the living world are not, don't always have to be approached scientifically. And we know that from the fact that, I don't know, there's, religion exists because, people need something to hold on to. Like, there's many things in the world that cannot be explained purely scientifically, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying religion was a bad example, but I'm saying to approach everything in this methodical manner is not necessarily the only way. And so I'm more interested in analyzing the conflict itself and finding the nuances of the conflict, and in that finding the structure of the film. So there may be many minute little mini resolutions happening at little points, but the resolution may not culminate into any kind of climax. In fact, there's this book I've been reading called, so it's about the narrative structure. It's a really beautiful book, but if I could find it, I'm looking to see. Then the first page, she talks about how, this might be, anyways, would rather read it from the book because she phrases it much more eloquently than me. But she essentially equates the sort of conflict resolution, Aristotelian structural form of storytelling to you use the word patriarchal, which is kind of exactly what she's relating it to, and she's relating it to the fact that it also relates to an erection. And no, that's not the book, but that this idea that it has to start and then explode for release, and how it's based so deeply in masculine modes of being. It's a really interesting book. Again, the other thing is that it doesn't mean that there's no room for that structure. I think that structure had a place and has a place in society, and there's beautiful ways that it has been used. But this idea that it's become the only structure is when it becomes oppressive.
What do you feel about the idea of guilty pleasures? So Ayn Rand, the writer, the controversial writer, she had once written an essay where she talked about this concept of demanding pleasure, which was
Hmm.
essentially about, like, in the way I understood it, that there are some sort of things that you do which sort of demand your attention a little more, but the pleasure you extract out of that is something that is really, like, for example, watching a 2 hour film which might be demanding for you to watch and have the attention for, but uske baad mein the feeling it will leave you with is something which will be very cathartic. So you should engage in the more demanding forms of pleasure. What is your understanding of guilty pleasures, and what are your guilty pleasures, if any?
I actually really like that definition you just mentioned of like how it's so true, no? Like it's that cliched saying of like, so yeah, I think though the thing I have been thinking about this guilty pleasure thing a lot because it's come up in conversations in general, maybe not in that term, but this thing, oh, but if everything was demanding, like you know, all of us have a long day and come home and go to Netflix and turn something on, and sometimes you just want to watch rubbish. I mean, I want to watch it too sometimes, and I've been thinking a lot about it in terms of like, what about it is guilty, and why we relate it as that and not just a pleasure. And I think the part, again, this is all not thought through thoughts, so I'm just riffing, but like the thing that I've been thinking is that most of why it's guilty is because in some ways this larger like societal structure that we live in, right, like this capitalist mode of living that we're living in, makes any form of pleasure or like time to enjoy in pleasure be something you should be guilty for. It's something specifically living in the US and the modes of existence here, where like I have friends who, like, if they are freelancing and they've chosen not to work for 2 months because they like need a break and they cannot work, the amount of guilt experienced around not working and like not being productive in society is so large, where I'm like, but baking bread is a productive thing to do. Like, you know, this idea that we've lost that relationship to how we use our time and what we consider productive. When I, very many moons ago, this human that I wouldn't really call a friend, perhaps an acquaintance, once said to me that, you know, when they look at me, they see the definition of an unproductive human. That like I was failing at life because I was not productive to society. Like, what was I giving society by exploring art and by like not, and the only measure of that productivity was capital. And obviously we had a very big fight and a very big like argument around it, but this idea of guilty, somehow to me, I'm thinking a lot of its relationship to that and the structures we live in and what we consider guilty. And so again, even in the space of art, it becomes so much harder for an overtaxed and overworked population that doesn't have like even the ability to say, okay, I don't want to work Saturday, Sunday. Okay, 7 days of working per week when like other people work once a month is not a fair structure, you know, like they're already so burdened and so taxed that like to engage with art and the demands of art is also exhausting. It's a fact. Like, to be able to engage in a certain kind of intellectual art takes work and brain space, and that's a privilege also, because for most people who are so tired that cooking dinner is exhausting, मेरे को नहीं करना वो काम, मुझे, I want to watch something that will make me shut my brain. So again, it's that, it to me goes back to how it is sort of, we want to keep the populations inactive and dumb. So then this term of guilty pleasure has become like, who considers what guilty pleasure is a different story, but the term itself is rooted in this idea that taking time out to engage with something that might be entertaining or beautiful or anything related to artistic, whether that's bread making or pot making, or they're all waste of time. So I'm guiltily using this time to experience pleasure, but that is not the kind of world we should live in, and it shouldn't be a guilt to watch something light. Watching something light and joyful is also needed in life, and even joy has nuances. And I think that even in watching something joyful or comedic or like fun just for the sake of fun can also be extremely well made and extremely nuanced. I think so it's not that I have any issues with, I wish I could make a rom-com. I really want to make a rom-com. But again, there's different type. There's the type of rom-com that's telling you what a woman can and can't do, and then there's the type of rom-com that's actually really minutely looking at love and the structures of love and how love makes us react. And that to me is a more interesting rom-com than one that is sort of telling you how to love within existing structures. So I think guilty is very subjective. But I do think that's my 2 cents on this thought of guilty pleasure. It is something I've been thinking about a lot. What is my guilty pleasure? Right now, very honestly, it has been baking. It hasn't even been watching anything. I have not really done, other than the very necessary amounts of work that I need to do, I am only baking. It is the only thing keeping me sane. That's my guilty pleasure. I don't know if you were asking specifically related to watching things.
Not necessarily. No.
In terms of watching, rom-coms are very big guilty pleasures. Depending on the type of rom-com. Like I think some of the rom-coms from the 90s, like even though they were a certain kind of, you know, male-female relationship and a certain kind of like, what's the word? Like, yeah, they're still set in some form of sexist patriarchal structures. There was still nuance to the characters, and there's some that I love that are beautiful because they were less concerned with those things and more concerned with the nuance of this thing. So yeah, I think guilty pleasure right now is baking.
So we started by talking about guilt in the first half, and now we're ending with guilty pleasure. So I think guilt has been the common term for this
yeah.
conversation that way.